In this video, we're going to explore the black hole of the traumatic identity, how and why it forms. Trauma is, by definition, something that threatens our identity, our social, our economic, our physical, our emotional, our mental identity. And identity is a pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being. Obviously, when two patterns collide with sufficient force, one of the patterns is disrupted. So trauma, by definition, is a larger energy, which means it feels out of our control. If we can control it, it's not a trauma. So trauma is a collision with a larger pattern of energy that by definition we cannot control, that leads to the rupture of identity or the expectation of a ruptured identity. In other words, you can have a traumatic event where you think you're going to die, you feel you're going to die, you expect to die at any moment, and then you don't die. But in that moment, the imminent expectation, the anticipation, or someone's hurting you and they're hurting you more and more, and you think they're going to kill you, and then they don't. Obviously, you don't have PTSD if you're dead. The expectation of a ruptured identity or the experience of a ruptured identity is what trauma is. It's what differentiates it from other pain. Something happens, causes me some pain, some annoyance, whatever, and then I'm back into the status quo. However, with trauma, the identity is ruptured. My definition of myself, which I form based on a repeated pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being in a certain way, spending in a certain way, talking in a certain way, engaging, is shattered. And once shattered, will not coalesce in the same way ever again. Once you've ruptured an identity traumatically, it does not go back to the way it was, which means that you are now a new person. You will be a new person post-trauma. However, in a culture that does not educate its people about transcendence, about the sense of identity that is non-egoic, the sense of self that is bigger than thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being. The witness, for example, in a Buddhist framework, would be a part of the self, meaning there's a part of the self that witnesses reality. There's a part of the self that witnesses the formation of an identity. There's a part of the self that witnesses the trauma. There's a part of the self that witnesses the shattering of identity, and that witnesses the coalescing of a new identity. But by and large, particularly in current Western culture, we know very little about that self. So it feels as if as our identity, our pattern is destroyed, that we are destroyed. And, there's nothing more shattering than the sense of being helplessly lost and out of control and not knowing who one is, because who one is has been broken, because we've identified with the pattern. This is who I am. I am the one who thinks this. Well, not anymore. after a traumatic event where a larger pattern of energy collides with the identity and shatters it. We are no longer the one who thinks that. We may be the one who's frantically thinking, who am I, what's next, what's going on? But that's not an identity that we recognize because it's new. Now, there is a need for a sustained default mode. That's another form of identity, or another term for identity, a sustained default mode. And the need for this comes from the fact that the conscious mind is so narrow. The free, conscious, discerning, processing mind is so narrow in its bandwidth that it can only make decisions with maybe at most 10% of the data that's coming our way. There is so much stimulation in a thick, dimensional, modern world that we cannot simultaneously say, who am I? What do I believe? What should I do next? What should I value? What should I buy? What should I eat? What should I wear? Should I go naked? Why should I wear clothes on a hot day instead of going naked? Why should I go naked instead of do this? Why should we work? What's the value? Should we use money? If you throw all of this at the conscious mind in a barrage of chaos, it will collapse because it cannot process that much data. 90% of that has to be put into a default mode, into a background algorithm that says that's the way it is because, frankly, that's the way it is. There's very little of a cult or culture that makes a lot of sense. Almost all of it could be intelligently iterated with even a 10-year-old's brain could say, why aren't we learning to drive in school? Why don't we learn to build houses rather than to do fractions? Why don't we learn to do plumbing and gardening and this rather than study the history of bridges in 1874? I mean, that makes no sense. A 10-year-old can upgrade most of our cultural institutions intelligently. So why do we do these things the way we do these things? Simply because that's the way we've done those things. And a big part of it is it's too overwhelming to reinvent a culture from scratch every day, one individual at a time. So we do these inane things that anyone with a brain can look at and say, this is insane. But it is a norm. It is a status quo. Until a traumatic event shatters the status quo, shatters the identity, the habit of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being in that way. Now, we are paralyzed. We don't have a lens. We don't have a default mode. And the reason we don't have a default mode is the identity is the default mode, the habit, and it didn't work. If it worked, it would not have been shattered by trauma. The fact that a larger energy does and did shatter the default mode means we need a new default mode that is superior to the old default mode. However, the explosion of information is too much for the conscious mind, which is used to being able, I wear the clothes that the cult says, I buy the things that the cult says, I talk in the language of the cult, I exchange in the currency of the cult. I do all these things the way they are done because that's the way they're done. without questioning. And all I question with my little narrow conscious mind is, should I wear the blue shirt that fits into the cult fashion or the green shirt that fits into the cult fashion? Do I order the hamburger with fries or with a salad? I'm not making a whole new cuisine in a given moment. I'm not deciding let's do a currency of napkins. Let's have a language. Let's have a vocabulary of eye gazing, where if you move your eyes like that, and then this, and then you know what that means, and then you move. Let's do that. I'm not reinventing communication. I'm looking for my 3 seconds, but make eye contact, but then look away to 1 or 2 seconds later. Well, what about this other cult that looks for 5 or 10 seconds and honors the sacred being in the other? Yeah, but that's not my cult. My cult looks and then looks away. So I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing, what everyone else is doing, until it doesn't work anymore. The identity is shattered. Now I can't go back to the way things were because it's traumatic. It's like losing a battle. You know, if you're imagine being a general and you've organized your troops and you've placed your artillery here, the cavalry's here, the machine guns here, whatever, the tanks are here. You've laid it all out. It's wonderful. You're confident in your formation. You go into battle and you lose every single piece on the board. Now, even if you have 10,000 more troops that you can call on, you don't put them back in the same position. But that's the best position you had. If it wasn't the best position you had, you wouldn't have done it. You did the best thing you knew how, and it failed. So what do? Even if you have more troops, it's like, I don't know a better way than the best. And that's terrifying. It's paralyzing. I'm overwhelmed with new possibilities. My little brain cannot figure it all out together. I can't go back to the old identity because it didn't work. That habit, that pattern failed. And I don't have a better one. Now this creates an entirely new level of trauma, of terror, of fear. Because it's up to you in a traumatically illiterate culture, when you're in that moment where you desperately need help. No one understands what you're going through in a traumatically illiterate cult. No one understands how important it is for them to help you in a traumatically illiterate cult. And no one knows what that help consists of. And in a sociopathic cult, people have the misguided notion that it's none of my business. It's misguided because if you saw someone's house erupting in flame in a densely packed neighborhood, you would understand the science that says this is everyone's fire. If we do not contain this fire will burn. And it won't be satisfied with one house and one person homeless. This fire will jump to here and jump to here. The smoke will go into other people's lungs. Mrs. Harris over on 3rd Street has asthma, and this smoke is going to blow over here and it's going to affect her. And when Mrs. Harris dies of an asthma attack, her stepdaughter is not going to have anyone to take care of her. And when she doesn't have anyone to take care of her, then the house has to be sold and this has to happen. And And this is all of our concern if you are a scientist. Now, if you're a member of a cult that says this is none of my business, you see, cults don't require any justification. They don't rely on science. They rely on dogma. Why is it none of my business? Because we all agree. There is a consensus to agree to a norm for no particular reason based on zero data. It's none of my business because it's none of my business, because we all agree it's none of my business. Now, as a materialistic cult, we do a little better job with physical stuff like fire, because as a materialistic cult, we all understand that possessions and money are more important than the people who make them or have them. Now, how do you know that people are less important than money and their possessions? Well, you have millions of homeless, and they're treated subhuman. They're shamed, they're dissociated from, they're driven by, they're not helped. Why? Why is it that millions of homeless in a wealthy country are homeless? Is it because they're immoral? Is it because they're evil? Is it because they're Christian or not Christian? No, it's of one thing. They don't have enough money to buy a house. Now, if they have enough money, they will be treated very well. If they do not have enough money, they will be treated very badly. So they're still the same person. So what's changing between whether someone is treated very well or very badly? Their money. In other words, money is treated very well, and the absence of money is treated badly, and the human being is relatively insignificant in the equation. Someone drives up with a Ferrari and a big checkbook and a suitcase full of cash. They will be treated very well in a capitalist cult, because it's not a humanist cult, it's a capitalist cult. It's a cult in service to capital. It's a cult in service to the greed and fear that capitalism and capital assuages. And so the human being isn't that important. So when you understand that the cult is built on dogma that doesn't hold up to science, meaning you cannot show mathematically that money is more important than the people who make it, but you can demonstrate and create this truth culturally. As a cult, you can all agree to worship money more than the people who make it. But as a science, when you try and water money, grow money, take a bit of paper called money and turn it into other bits of paper without people, it doesn't work. The goose that lays the golden eggs is more valuable than the golden egg, was the moral of the golden goose. The people who make the money are by definition more valuable than the money they make, except when you overlay capitalist dogma on top of the equation. It's dogma, meaning it's unverified by science. And cults are built on dogma. Everyone agrees that this lie will represent reality. And because everyone agrees and will punish you if you violate the cult dogma, you agree as well, because you don't want to be hit as a child. You don't want to be teased as a child for not fitting in to the dogma, to the cult. So when you're in that reality, you are overwhelmed. Now, you're in chaos. You're in overwhelm. You need an identity. You need a pattern to stabilize. The old pattern doesn't work. You need a pattern. The old pattern isn't available. You need a pattern. Your conscious mind cannot piece together a new pattern coherently and intelligently. It can't keep up with the moment, which means you don't have an algorithm to navigate fully. You are in shock. This is an incredibly vulnerable time. You don't have a vehicle to navigate reality. Now, into the vacuum of a need for identity and the fear of the unknown enters the identity of the wound, of the trauma itself. You are in desperate need of a new pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being. And your conscious mind cannot craft one fast enough. If it was that competent, it probably would have avoided the trauma. And this is perhaps the most traumatic element of trauma, is the realization that I, as I think of myself, I lack the competence to develop a new identity that works. Because if I had that competence, I would have done it. I would have changed the old identity, the old pattern, into that pattern already, and it would have worked. There's no escaping the fact that we are participants. There are no spectators in our reality. Everything that happens in our reality, we participate in by causing it, by allowing it, by being blind to it, by having misinformation, by having a faulty algorithm. We are participants in our reality, as is everyone else in our reality. It's a co-creation between our ecology and all the many people involved. There are no bystanders. If someone chooses to watch and not help, that is a participation. That's a choice to participate in a dissociative identity that says, oh, that's their problem, I'm not going to get involved. And it takes a lot of sociopaths to allow many of the most chronic problems in our cult to perpetuate intergenerationally. Because it just takes a few people to say, no, not on my watch, that's my issue. No more, let's address this. That's a human being. It takes a few human beings to step in and stop the pattern of violation, of trauma, of abuse. It takes a lot of people to say, that has nothing to do with me. For certain easy to stop patterns to continue generation after generation. Rape, gender discrimination, racism. It's all kinds of things. We see it and we say, I don't want to get involved. So the burden gets passed to the next generation. Now into that chaos comes the pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being that is the trauma itself. The moment of being hit by the car is a thought, is a feeling, is a being. There's a thinking, feeling, doing, being of and speaking of that moment. And it's a very loud identity. It's a very loud thought because by definition, the trauma and the traumatic event is one of the loudest things in our lives. If it didn't have such a big impact, it wouldn't have been a trauma. So enter the pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being of the traumatic event itself, and the desperation for a new identity, a new pattern. Well, this one is available. It's the pattern of the trauma. It is the traumatic identity. And so the ego, the self, looking for a new identity, overwhelmed with the absence of identity, jumps onto the lifeboat of something that is known but very, very painful. It's known because it's already happened. It's very, very painful because it is a traumatic event. Now the trauma becomes PTSD, where the primary identity, the primary pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being, references the most intense moments of our lives, the traumatic event. And I now define myself. I form a new identity around the event, around the pattern of reactivity to the traumatic event. And now I have certainty, now I have definition, now I have a new identity. Now it's a crippling identity and it has a very high cost because it's a reliving of the single most painful moment of my entire life. But it is an identity. It is a mask between our sense of self and the world that we can cling on to like a life raft in a storm. It's filled with rusty nails. It's overwhelmingly painful, but it is an identity. It is a pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being. And we are now invested in having an identity, a sense of self, having something that's solid to offset the waves in a shipwrecked storm. It's like a ship capsizing and grabbing onto one of the boards of the boat, filled with rusty nails, splinters, and this. It is a remnant of the trauma, but it is also something solid in the storm and in the waters. And this is the traumatic identity. Now, once we form an identity defined by the wound, by the trauma, one of the roles of identity is to perpetuate itself. In other words, the reason we cling to our dogmas and our identities and our cults so passionately, despite their evident absurdity. You look at any cult of the 10,000 cults in human history, and if we're not identified with them, we look at them and say, that is crazy. That's nuts. What were they thinking? The Mayans, where they would take little nails and they'd go along and they'd puncture the skull in hundreds of little places and elevate this into an art form, skull puncturing. It's like, what were they thinking? Or the winner of the game of the equivalent of basketball has their head chopped off. Well, it is no more insane than wealthy countries that can't feed their homeless. I mean, you look on the outside, you say, this is nuts. Get it together, cult. But you go inside the cult and you find inevitably the same thing. This is who we are. We can't change, or we would be traumatized. We would be unsettled. We wouldn't know who we were anymore. We are capitalists. We are sociopaths. We are this. This is who we are. If we become human beings who care about people more than capital, we wouldn't know who we were. So we are this. We find groups of people clinging desperately to the absurdity of their cult identity And this is true in every one of the 10,000 cults and cultures in human history. Most of them are extinct, meaning every one of those people thought this was, Quetzalcoatl, the serpent that created the earth, the tortoise that burped, and then the ocean was created, and this was the language. There have been 10,000 languages. Most of them are extinct. There have been 10,000 cults. Most of them are extinct. Belief systems extinct. Religions extinct. Systems extinct. Land masses extinct. Borders extinct. Cults are fleeting remnants of stupidity in many cases. But if you go into the center of those cults at any given point, you will find people incredulous that you would not want to have your skull tapped with holes, or you wouldn't want your clitoris cut off with a rusty knife and be denied initiation into a womanhood. Are you nuts? This is what we do. We cut off little boys' foreskins before this is what we do. Why would you change who we are? We think this way, we feel this way, we do these things, we buy these things, we look and talk this way. That's who we are. Don't question it. Don't think. The traumatized person has no such comfort. They have lost who they are in the moment of trauma. They have to discover a new sense of self. They remember, they put together and relive the trauma and form an identity in the wound, in that event. And like all identities, they're designed to self-perpetuate. All cults, every cult is an identity. Every culture is a cult. Every cult, every identity is self-perpetuating. How? How? Our brains can process well under 50% of the sensory data in our environment, which means we are constantly choosing what of the majority of reality to tune out so that we can reinforce a status quo with a minority of data. We're tuning out this, we're tuning out that, we're tuning out this because it doesn't fit the story. And we're elevating this because it fits our story. What is an identity? It is a story. What is a story? It is a pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being. So we create and relive and assimilate and identify with the wound, with the traumatic event. We think about the traumatic event. We feel about the traumatic event. We talk about the traumatic event. We avoid talking about the traumatic event. It's referencing this intense event in our life. And there's all this stuff. Birds are singing. This little child over here is playing. We're not there. We're back in Vietnam being this and that. We're not. We're tuning out that which is not consistent with our identity, with our sense of who we are. Which, of course, there's gravitational pull towards the most intense moments of our lives. What are the most intense moments of our lives? Trauma, death, birth, trauma. The death of an old identity and the birth of a new identity. Trauma is among the single most intense moments of our lives. This has a gravitational pull. It pulls our thoughts to the equation. It pulls our feelings into the equation. It heightens feelings. It heightens sensation. So there is always a gravitational pull to intensity. And trauma is the most intense thing. There's a pull towards identity. And when identity has been wrapped into the new trauma, the new identity wrapped into the traumatic event, then every time the traumatic event is relived, the identity is thicker, is heavier, is stronger. Now it becomes a real pattern. It was just an event, but I've now relived it and relived it and relived it and relived it and relived it. I am now the one who relives the event. My trauma now defines me. Now that trauma becomes my set point, in order to know who I am, I have to relive and remember, reassemble the memory, to re-put it together, remember it. I have to keep doing that to know who I am. Otherwise, I'm lost. I don't know who I am. I'm confronted with the future. I'm confronted with the unknown, with the terror of the unknown, which in a sociopathic cult, the unknown is the most terrifying thing you can imagine. It's out of your control. And in a sociopathic cult, the unknown is projected as an enemy. It is in fact neutral. The unknown represents the possibility field. And every possibility field goes out equally in both directions, towards pain and horror and towards beauty, love, wonder. A possibility field, it's like the radius of a compass. If you go out 4 inches, it goes out 4 inches in all directions, north, east, south, and west. You go out 8 inches, it goes out 8 inches in all directions, towards whatever you consider to be good and towards whatever you consider to be bad. So the possibility field, the future, is neutral. The unknown is neutral. But the traumatized individual, frightened of pain and fear, desperate to avoid facing pain and fear, projects, emphasizes the negative in the unknown in the future, and is afraid of it, and protects itself from the unknown by clinging to the known pattern of identity. So there's a very strong pull towards that phenomena, which becomes PTSD, the identity of living, feeling, thinking, speaking the wound and keeping it alive, because I cannot face the unknown. This part of me died. I don't know how to assemble a new me. And here I am reliving the death to keep myself coherent in an identity, in a pattern, to protect me from the chaos of the unknown. That's why it becomes the black hole, because the more time you spend in PTSD, in the traumatic identity, the more pain there is around the wound, because it is the most painful identity you could form. The more painful you are and the more time you spend in the wound, the more it has to mean something. Or if someone did this to you, the more you need to get revenge or have something, happen about this because, they did this to you and now they did this to you. And then because this was happening, you lost your job and now they did that to you. And there's this dynamic of it just goes on and on and on and on as an entire identity is formed around the wound. That's why the traumatic identity is a black hole. It will consume as much energy as we give it. And we will keep giving it energy until there is the discernment, the hope, the courage to form a new identity ahead of the traumatic identity. That takes hope, that takes belief, that takes a faith in a better identity than the overwhelm and the unknown. Now, nothing feels as real as the traumatic identity because it's vivid, it's intense, it's real, it's alluring and safe in its certainty. But out there is an uncertain, a tenuous probability field, possibility field. And those tenuous possibilities are new seeds in the future that are not strong enough to hold the desperation of a shattered ego, of a shattered sense of self that desperately wants to put weight and have support and certainty in the desperation of a shipwrecked tsunami that shattered the dogmas, that shattered the identity, that ripped away the futures, that gouged through the traditions and left you far out at sea, barely alive, in a chaos that is the other side of every tsunami that hits ground, that washes houses out to sea. You want a piece of wood that is solid, even if it's filled with rusty nails, to rest the incredible weight of decisions and consciousness. And this is why an intelligent cult, an empathic cult, ensures that every single person is trained in the competency of friendship and has at least one friend in that ocean, in that nightmare, to be a resting point. Because all you need is one point of certainty in that chaos. In the epitome of modernity, where neighbors do not know each other and certainly are not there at 4 a.m. when you need to cry, we have robbed billions of people of human certainty, of human empathy, in favor of the option of purchasing 20 varieties of toothpaste, the last thing you care about when you're hit with an inevitable wave. Because in a cancerous cult dynamic where we wage war on our underlying ecology, we put motions of energy in place that come back and collapse the structures that have no foundation. Every civilization depends on its underlying ecology, its underlying infrastructure of oxygen, of clean water, of weather regulation. And a cancerous and dissociative cult ignores and violates that relationship in such a way that you have shock waves as the reverberations of hostility and cruelty towards the underlying environment come back, because we are nested within that environment. You know, it's like going out to sea in a rowboat and dropping bombs, throwing 10-ton bombs into the water. As they explode, yes, plenty of fish are died, coral is decimated. But the boat is tipped over. We're part of the ecology that we dishonor with such vigor, with such dissociative ignorance. And so, of course, we're knocked over by the bombs that we unload on one aspect of our ecology after another, in frighteningly escalating curves of stupidity, this energy that washes out towards the ecology, rips back. And you see, if we were smart enough to understand that that would happen, we wouldn't have done it. The stupidity and ignorance that leads to violating ecological principles leads directly to damaging all patterns of energy in that dynamic. So we need to build, cling to that wound for certainty, cling to the PTSD, the memory for identity, to know who we are, to ground in some pattern that feels solid, the traumatic identity. And we need to plant seeds that are far less solid in the future. And most of them will fizzle out, like nature's teaching of how a dandelion's seeds work. A dandelion sends out 1,000 seeds. They blow off in all direction, and 3% of them find just the right environment and grow, and now there are 3 dandelions instead of 1. And the dandelion plant prospers with a successful, iterative, self-generating identity, a seed that becomes as much or better than its parent. And like all identities, so many of the seeds that we plant, maybe 3%, maybe 5%, take root and take time. And so the challenge, while in the black hole of the traumatic identity, it's absorbing more and more energy and consuming, is to put out little feelers, little threads, little possibilities, understanding that 95% of them may die, may wither, but in time, an identity forms that's more solid, that we can count on, a new rhythm, a new sense develops, a new sense of certainty, a new habit of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being, which, if we learned from the trauma, if we learned why that identity collapsed, if we learn about what collapsed the identity, if we form a new relationship with that energy, if we grow and change in what's called post-traumatic growth, we can eventually become superior in intelligence as an identity, as a habit of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being. We can become more intelligent in our thoughts, our feelings, our words, our behavior, and our being. And an identity can exist that would not have existed without the trauma, that is informed and grows through, that transcends the trauma. And this is human evolution. And there will come a day when education includes the science of the psyche, the science of trauma, the science of identity, and post-traumatic growth, the science of post-traumatic growth. And when that day comes, we have a pivot into a highly iterative species that can reduce 90% of its chronic unnecessary suffering and elevate by 100x the rapidity with which new identities are consciously brought into reality. And it is you and I, people who have experienced life-threatening trauma, who have experienced PTSD, that can become the way showers, the technologists of that more intelligent cult, of the cult that can blossom into a healthier form of culture.